just taking a peek at some of these options that are available because we want to be on the same page. See, this is what I was doing beforehand. So part of why I personally like to use hand tools is because I do have a CSA, and as Sue is saying, you really want to have equipment that people can handle and that they're not going to injure themselves with. So I am very much in favor of having, a lot of small scale tools that folks can use safely. Backing out from that, what we're really talking about before we talk about the hand tools, which we can definitely delve into, and we can also delve into some of these no-till pieces of equipment. But the two walk behinds that we're thinking about are these BCSs, and there's a variety of these. Let me start with looking at the actual tractor unit. So the BCS is this super beefy little walk behind tractor that we're seeing here. We've got a couple of different models. Dan was saying he's using the model 853, which is down here somewhere. It's one of the bigger ones. Oh, here we go. So the basics of this particular tractor that you really want to focus on are that this is really designed to be a piece of equipment that drives attachments, right? It's an engine that's turning this PTO shaft that's driving other things. So what we see here is a rototiller attachment listed here. If we look at the other products that are available here, we'll go to gardening. If we look at this, these are all the things that you can use with a BCS. And you'll notice that they're all kind of heavy duty first pass or preparing for first pass type of field work. So there's nothing here that helps you with weed control. There's nothing here that is more detail oriented. It's really how do you prepare the field? So we've got a ridger, which is going to make those, raised beds. We've got a rototiller with a depth roller. So basically it just controls how deep your rototiller goes. This is a nice thing when you upgrade from using one of those rototillers that we've probably all used, the ones that, drive you around like crazy and they dig themselves into the ground as far as they can. These pieces of equipment are designed to have more control. And this is one of the funny kind of catch-22s about equipment. The bigger it gets, the more ability you have to control it because it's so large and dangerous and scary, right? So not only can you rip your arm off with it, but also you can generally control things more and more the bigger they get. So it's a weird balance to be thinking about with this equipment. But if we look at this, there's some interesting things to be considered with the BCS unit. You can skip to the end. Oh, I did click on it. You can skip to the end of the season. And after you've gone through the whole season and figured out how to control your weeds, you can use this to dig crops back up. I have never seen anybody actually use this. So if anybody knows, I'd be interested in hearing how it works. But there is equipment available for, the other side of the season. And as Sue was mentioning, the BCS unit itself only costs a couple $1,000s, but this one attachment costs almost $3,000. So you can add up costs pretty quickly with this unit. Let me see if I can scroll back down here. Other things to just consider with this, if you wanted to be able to apply plastic, it doesn't sound like folks are super into that, but if you wanted to, you could. And there are some options that are nicer for the soil. So it sounds like a lot of you are interested in kind of reducing your impact on the soil, which is great. The Power Harrow is one of the tools that you can use to do that. The action is just gentler for the soil. So this is one of the ways to prepare soil and make a really nice seed bed that doesn't pulverize your soil every time you use it. So this is definitely a consideration. But when you look at cultivating equipment, there's a little bit of stuff listed here. I've never seen anybody use a BCS very effectively for cultivation equipment. And if we go back to actually looking at the tractor itself, you can kind of see why. So if we go back to this unit, this thing is built like a little tank, right? It's a little, little low riding piece of equipment that growls its way through the field, and there's very little space underneath it. So if you imagine trying to use this to cultivate your crops, you can only do that until they're, a couple inches tall, and then the actual unit starts to drag and cause problems. So really, this is like a beginning and end of the season thing. And if you want to be able to do things like clear land, there's also options for that. So if we look at the attachments again, there's these mowing attachments. So if you need to be able to clear fields, clip pastures, you could get a sickle bar mower. You can actually get a brush hog that's going to take out relatively sizable stuff in fields if that's something that you need to do. And in theory, you can also make hay. So these are all reasons that people go with this BCS, is because you've got all of this extra equipment that you can be using with this. But this is basically a tractor, right? This is a tractor that you're walking behind. But the other option, so if you had a tractor, or if you really were just looking for ways to make weed control easier, that's where people start thinking about the tillmower. So you can see, actually, before I do this, I'm going to show you a video of it because I think it's easier. So if you remember when I was talking about the tillmower, this is really a machine whose only purpose is to pull. So this is what that looks like. And I don't know if you're hearing this, but this is the #1 reason that I don't like using this equipment. It is so loud. I do not enjoy loud things. But you can see all it does is it pulls equipment through the field. So what we're seeing here is, not a piece of equipment that drives other pieces of equipment. It's only a piece of equipment that pulls. And what it's doing is it's pulling a series of little knives and sweeps that are cultivating in between the rows. So this tractor doesn't do anything else for you. It's not going to be able to help you with plowing the field. It's not going to be able to be used for doing any mowing or anything that involves any moving parts, right? This is just being drugged. This could be pulled by anything. This could be pulled by human power too, but you wouldn't want to. So, that all this is just a way to make your life easier, right? So these are the two very different options that we're talking about when we talk about walk behind tractors. And I'm seeing things happening in the chat, which I can't see yet. That is cool. It is. So let's see. Sue says, depending on which model one uses, attachments are available specific to the model. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and Dan, I'm curious. Now I do want to call on you here. Because I should say my own experience is that we have a couple of tractors, and in part that's because I am intimidated. Like Sue was saying, I don't like using, personally, as a relatively small female, I do not like using the walk behinds for primary tillage because, I have really nice soil, which I'm feeling more and more grateful for. And then occasionally I'll have a huge rock, like a rock that's big enough to stop the tractor. And if I were to hit that with a rototiller, it would be not the most comfortable thing that's ever happened. So I like to do my primary tillage with the tractor. And then I want to compact the soil and disturb the soil as little as possible after that. So that's just my theory on how to do things. So I really like being able to actually use hand tools mostly after that first pass with the tractor. I never bring it in again. So, it's just a matter of what works for you. So Dan, tell us about what you're doing with the BCS and what your limits are with that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I mean, so what I'm doing is I started using it of growing right into reed canary grass, which is a really aggressive, it's a rhizomatous grass. So it's got a little bunch of roots that go all through. And when you, if you, each of those roots, if it gets tilled, is going to make a new plant. So it's kind of hard to control it just through tilling. And so I'll mow it a couple of times in advance or even burn it to get rid of that residue. And then I go through with the rotary plow and I do strips, and I do the strips wide enough that I can fit a brush mower through there. And 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 then I'll use a weed eater with a grass blade to get into the row a couple of times. And then I'll mow. If I plant in May, I'll need to mow every week or every week or two until kind of midsummer, till that corn's about knee high or waist high, and then can pretty much let it go at that point. If I plant later, if I do a June planting, I don't need to mow as much because that reed canary is a cool season grass and it slows down, and it slows down a lot in midsummer. But that's one of the main ways that I use that rotary plow, and it works really good for pumpkins and squash as well.
Thank you. That's helpful. So having seen these options, what do folks think about using equipment in your own systems? And if it's easier in the chat, I can watch the chat. Because one of the things we can try to do here is to figure out what might work with your system and actually look at what that equipment would do. I think I have pulled up enough videos that I could pull that off. And also, if you're saying to yourself, I don't want to use equipment for that, let's talk about that too, because that's a super valid way of doing things. Like I said, I grow an acre of garlic and I don't ever cultivate it. We plant it, I cultivate it once, and then I cover the whole thing with shredded hay. So I'm very much in favor of not cultivating if I don't have to. So if you want to talk that through, that's fine too.
That rotary plow, also that same technique works really well for garlic. I do the same thing, and then I actually have a lawnmower that has a bag on it, and so I'll mow and then I'll just use that for mulch, and you got everything just right there.
Definitely.
Jen or Greg, do you want to offer up your scenarios that you're working with as an example that we can walk through?
I was just thinking, the field that I am currently using is kind of it's fallow, pretty much has all kinds of goldenrod and crap and junk. And I mean, the plant life is all significant to the niche and whatever else you got going on in there. Our biggest thing for that particular property is preparing the field for planting. This last year, Rep Smith, she planted a garden out there and tilled up like a 30 by 30 or 30 by 40 plot, tilled the whole thing up. I tried what I learned at Dudek from Dan, just breaking up, cultivating or turning up ground 6 rolls and nothing in between. I gave that a whirl. My downfall with that was I didn't have enough soil within those rolls to raise the beds. And there was like a lot of coarsey woody plants that hindered a lot of the growth. And then, of course, when it was difficult to get over there. They got overtaken by weeds, and I didn't get the cucumbers I wanted, the acorn squash, the watermelon, the pumpkins. Um, we did get a couple of the deer that took my plants, so I felt like that was a win-win situation for all of us. So moving forward, we have been given the opportunity to get a BCS to help with the breaking of the ground. Our other downfall with that field is we don't have a water source that is like a well or a hydrant or anything. The closest place is maybe 10 hoses away. So, well, if you got 100-foot hoses, we'd have to hook to a house. What we were doing was filling tanks of water and putting them in water troughs just to water our garden when it didn't rain. I think I asked Leah about ways of collecting water without, like rain, whatever. She threw some ideas at me, but I think they're a little bit out of my my cognitive thinking right now. I'm not worried about the tilling and stuff like that at this time. And I think Leah and I were going to meet over there, and she was going to look at the field, but timing, it didn't work out. And maybe we can set something up with Dan and Leah after the snow melts and all of that good stuff, and then we can come up with a plan. This field was in like an old horse field at one time. It was a garden years ago, but I would say that was probably, let's see, 25, 30 years ago. So nothing has been planted in there until this last year. I can't think of anything else other than the issues we have are the water, the deer, and not enough soil for my garden that I did. So ideas, thoughts, prayers, whatever.
Prayers are super helpful with deer control.
I'm gonna mute now so I can listen. Hopefully you heard me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm curious, before we talk about this exact example, how many of you have, let's call it extra land, more land than you need to work with? Because it sounds like I was hearing that with a few of you. Sounded that way with Greg. I'm assuming.
Well, I'm gonna butt in, and the Ho-Chunk Nation has like a lot of agricultural land that we could utilize as tribal members. However, a majority of those lands are leased out to non-tribal farmers, and we utilize that lease funding that farming lease funding, we use that to maintain those lands. So the other aspect of it is the closest agricultural field that to me would be about 25 minutes away. The next one would be like 35 to 40 minutes away.
Mhm.
And I am trying to stay within that radius of 20 to 25 miles. Just based on like fuel cost. So it's difficult for me to travel on a daily basis to check a vegetable garden.
Mhm.
I do plant about 2.5 to 3 acres of flint corn, and I have to find farmland that is close to the area to lease. This last year, I think I paid, I can't remember if it was $1,000 an acre or $500 an acre. It was like about $1,500 I had to pay out.
Did that include them planting it for you?
Yes,
Okay.
and I don't have them use any kind of fertilizer or anything, so or like what's the weed killer?
Yeah, Roundup.
Roundup.
Yeah, I don't have them do that because the end result is we want to use this for food.
Yeah. And so they'll like plow, plant, and cultivate it to keep the weeds down.
I can't recall if they cultivated this last year. But the same farmer wants to work with me again this year, and when you pay them that kind of money, I guess, yeah, they'll take any kind of money they can get in this day
Yeah.
and
So,
age.
and Greg, I'll just say I'm more than happy to come up at any point. I'm happy to bring up that BCS if you wanted to see it in practice, or if you get one, I'm happy to come up and kind of just help to show you the ropes on using it, because they're not too hard to use, but there's definitely a few safety things and just a couple of things that makes it a lot easier if you do it right from the beginning.
Yeah, I'm supposed to find one and send you or Leah the invoice. Do you recall, Leah?
That's
You can
too
send it to Leah.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to send it to Dan.
Good luck,
Make
Dan.
sure though that you get this is really important for, I think, everybody on this call to know. BCS has a 20% discount for nonprofits, and they've said that includes tribes. So 20% and no tax, you're looking at a 25% savings off of just buying something, as a regular customer. Those dealers will generally not tell you about it, and they may not know about it, but that's BCS America. That's their policy. So just keep that one in mind. That's a really big cost savings.
Okay, and the closest one that I found to my area, like dealer, there's a place in Sparta, Wisconsin. I think it's Hagen's something. I can't remember. Lawn Care or Hagen's Hardware or something. So I just haven't made it over there to look at any of their equipment. So I will make sure to bring that up, and then I just need to take Leah's contact information with me and all of that other stuff. So sorry, I didn't mean to take up too much of your time. Crystal looks like she's thinking.
Oh yeah, I always thinking, but thinking about what you're saying. So it's good that you're talking. So the reason I was asking about having extra land was that it sounds like you could use the BCS, and that a lot of you are doing smaller amounts of vegetables and then larger amounts of corn. So for the vegetables, one of the considerations is you could have a BCS. You could use the BCS to cut green material. I would call it hay, because I don't know if you need to make it into hay. But you could have, an area where you're growing basically the mulch for the garden right next to the garden. And then you could actually harvest for the garden, move that material to the garden to suppress weeds and help with your moisture issues. And then every 5 years or so, you could actually just flip back and forth. So it's almost like you have, an area that's in cover crops for 5 years, which is building that soil the whole time. So it's no till, but you're still harvesting something that you're contributing to the other side. And then when you make that flip, you're improving soil health for the side that you now get to rest for 5 years. And hopefully you've kept your weeds in control too. So I'm just going to show you a picture of how we're doing this to see if it's helpful at all. If I can just remember how to share in Zoom. You ever do so many Zooms that you just can't even Zoom anymore? I'm there. So, so here's what we're doing. We're actually, and you can't see the hayfield from here, but there's strips here in this picture. So this back strip is actually cover crop. We have a slightly quicker rotation than I just described. It's 3 years instead of 5. But back here, this piece is in cover crop. This very out of control looking cabbage is actually cabbage being grown through a cover crop. So that's cabbage grown through vetch and triticale. And then this here is where we just literally put hay from our own hay field in the entire area. So this is what I meant. This will never get cultivated during the entire growing season. You know, we put on enough that this will basically take care of itself the whole time. So if you wanted to go the BCS route and you weren't going to do a lot of cultivating equipment along with that, this is definitely an option, as long as you had a way to cut that green material and you had a source of green material that didn't have a lot of weeds. This is a possibility. We use second cutting. So basically you allow that hayfield to grow up, and all of the cool season things that flower early make their seed. That seed drops and then we cut it. So we're avoiding all the weed seeds. And that has worked out pretty well. I mean, I still have to go through that field a couple times and pull things by hand, but you know, it's a pretty solid system. So that's one thought. What are other people's thoughts about how you might want to do this? Because that's just what I've come up with. Oh, Viola says, I may have missed it, but what might be best for weeding? No, you didn't miss it. I'm avoiding it.
Well, you're not avoiding it. You're coming up with an alternative, right? So instead of
Yes.
weeding, putting down the mulch to suppress the weeds from growing in the first place.
Mhm.
So you guys have your 1.5 to 3 acre farm area. If you're not planning on planting all of it in corn and vegetables this coming year, what she's saying is plant part of it as the cover crop that you're going to come in and chop down and add then as like a mulch to where you're growing your vegetables to suppress the weeds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And this doesn't work for everything. So like, let me see if I can get this.
So can I bother you real quick?
I don't think that's possible, but yes.
Well, anything's possible. But after Leah mentioned that comment about cover crops, so as I understand it, let's say I have a 4-acre field where I planted last year. If I put 2 of that into cover crop like hays and whatnot to create my mulch, not utilize that one, but like replanting mulch, you know, the mulch growth. And then when I'm done with the other 2 acres of garden, vegetables, whatever, whatnot, I plant that with cover crops and then I move on to the other field. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's different thought processes around that. So like that picture I was showing you, that's where we do garlic. So it goes every 3rd year into garlic, and that gives it 2 years out of garlic, which helps with diseases and things. If you flipped back and forth every other year, that's a little closer than I would want to avoid problems. If you had the land and you had the ability, I would want to see a little bit longer rotation, and maybe instead of an annual cover crop, you could do some perennial cover crops. So you could go in, you're in Wisconsin, right? I think. Yeah. So you could go in with like a rye vetch mix And that could live for a few years without any problem and be really, really good for the soil. And then you could let that go for, up to 3 years, 4 years, and then till it back in. And then you'd actually have a better rotation for diseases, and your soil would have a better rest in between too. But that means, coming up with a larger chunk of land that you're really devoting to doing this. But
So you'd have
potentially you'd have, oh, go ahead.
you'd have your perennial cover in the same spot for 3 years, and you'd have your garden in the same spot for 3 years, and then you would switch.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of different ways to do it. Let me see if I can actually share the whiteboard. So the other option, like what I do with garlic, because garlic's really fickle. I like to, so like, let's say this is my field. And the deer are always outside of it. Deer stay over here. They never go in the field. But what I'm doing in the garlic field, and these are 3 even sections because I'm really good at drawing these. So I will actually have, like, let's say this is my garlic. I'll plant this after I harvest the garlic in July. This will go into perennial cover crop. And then the garlic goes over here. The year before the garlic gets planted, I actually take this out of perennial cover crop in like the middle of summer, and I plant buckwheat one time before the garlic in order to help control any weeds that I have here. So this was in cover crop for a little over 2 years, perennial cover crop. And then it goes into this buckwheat to help just prepare the soil so that it's completely weed-free, or as weed-free as you can get. And then this stayed in perennial cover crop during that time. So it's just been resting. So it's really a question of, whatever works for your land and your system. But just imagine, what space you have and give it the longest rests possible is the way I think about it. And rests that have cover crop rather than having weeds that you didn't really want to be in your garden are really helpful. Does that make sense? Did my deer drawing screw it all up? Couldn't help it. I really can't help myself when I have a whiteboard. I just draw whatever comes to mind.
No, your deer didn't screw it up, but that brings us to another thing is what's the best source of keeping deer out of your garden? Well, 308, 150 grain bullet would, but are there any things out there that keep those critters out? And I know it's going to happen. I know that. It's just a question. Maybe you can think about it.
Well, I mean, I can tell you what I do, because, our field is surrounded by woods. So we have a wonderful population of deer. I just use a 2-strand electric fence, actually. It runs off of a solar panel. It costs, I don't know, maybe $600 or $700. So it's not very expensive to fence off an acre. And, deer don't have depth perception, right? They can't figure out how to tell when things are apart. So if you have a fence that has 2 wires and one's a little higher and one's a little lower and they're a couple feet apart, the deer can't figure it out. They don't know that they can jump over it, even though they easily could. So the lower wire on the outside is electrified. That helps too. So they only touch it once, in the spring, they touch it with their nose. And I don't have a lot of deer actually make it over that. So that's what I would do. And, it runs on a solar panel, so you can put it anywhere. Is that an acceptable answer for you?
Yeah, well, we tried the fish line
Mm.
thing, and it seemed like it worked for a couple of days, and then we went back out and checked the cornfield that was out there, and there was fresh deer tracks throughout the corn. So I don't know. Like I said, I think we got one or two of those deer during deer season, but if you're trying to grow crops for your family and stuff like that, and they're getting at it, then that's the hard part. And I know all farmers deal with that, and I'm not trying to eradicate the deer. I just, when you put all that time and effort into growing food and someone else or something else reaps the rewards, then it does get frustrating.
Oh yeah, no, it really does. Yeah, and it's amazing how much they eat. I don't think you realize it sometimes, especially with things like corn. It's easy to miss it, but they can do a lot of damage. Yeah, I do other people have better or more workable solutions than fencing? It's the only thing that we've found that works. I mean, we hunt them too, but you know, we can only eat so many deer.
Speak to what we've been doing. We tried different methods, everything from putting up fencing and then adding height to it so that we can run strings with like CD discs, blowing in the wind, scarecrows, all kinds of different things, noise. But we find putting up a fence and then extending up higher and then putting netting around it. Netting seems to be not as expensive as having to put up a higher fence. You know, the 1,000 square foot garden we had to spend over $500 before we could put one seed of corn into there. So, but like you say, they devastate it and then you don't have food. So, you know, but I think what would be cool, and I talked to my boss about it, is like the fencing that contractors have, that when they have a site and they put up the temporary fencing around it, it's usually 7, 8 feet tall. If you rotate your gardens, it'd kind of be cool to have those and set those sections up so then you can move your fence with what you're working with. And I found the areas that we wanted to fence, it's probably on par cost-wise to do something like that. I know it's a lot of work, but so is constantly repairing fence.
Pizza?
We also have Bear that have figured out how to climb some fences too, and they took out a 90 by 60 plot that had all our, not all of it, but a lot of our squash in it. So we're constantly trying to find new ways to do it. With our newer corn areas, we are going to go with the electric. You know, the thing with those darn deers is they figure things out. You know, it's just like squirrels. You do a squirrel-proof feeder, bird feeder, and they figure it out. You know.
Oh, true.
But yeah, the bullet is a good idea, but oh well.
Yeah, nuisance permits. Yeah, but you know, I think fencing is the more passive effective option for sure. Yeah. So I want to make sure I actually answered Viola with this part about weeding, since we were supposed to talk about weeding. So Viola, I'm gonna pivot back real quick, and I don't know what people's timeline is like, by the way. When do people need to be done? Specifically Leah, since she's hosting us.
My afternoon is free, so I'm willing to let this conversation go as long as possible. If people have other things that they have to get to, if you want to just drop your questions in the chat, and we'll stay on as long as Crystal can stay on, and I'm recording this, so you can pop back in and listen to it later if you have to get to another meeting. But otherwise, we'll just keep on rolling until it's just me and Crystal talking about small equipment.
Fun. All right, I'm in the wrong window again. So I want to go back to this question about weed control equipment. But I have to say, Viola, I think it sounds like you're on a somewhat smaller scale than necessarily makes sense for this equipment. So I might also pivot back to some of the hand-driven stuff. But if you wanted to look at actual cultivation equipment, like you wanted to know what are the attachments that you can use for weed control, a good place to start is this Tillmore website. And you can go to the cultivation section and you can see some of the more common tools that are available to put onto either a cultivating tractor or even things like a wheel hoe. And honestly, I use my wheel hoe the most when it comes to weed control in the garden. So like this picture that I was on here, yeah, here, that's a funny, it's very fuzzy. Let me see if I've got a better version of that. Nope, I don't. Well, in any event, this is just like our carrots and beets and stuff. This is where I use a wheel hoe. I push it by hand. It's fine. And you know, that's for an acre of vegetables. So that's what I do. If you want to use this piece of equipment, this Tillmore walk behind, there's lots of options. So here we see what's called a basket weeder. And this is just these little metal baskets, basically. They roll across the ground. And if the weeds are really small, now the key with most of this equipment is it doesn't even look, when you look at the videos, it doesn't look like they're doing weed control, because the ideal time to control weeds is when they're really small, right? They're at this little thread stage where they just have two little leaves and a little tiny root. And so this little bit of disturbance is able to kill them. And that's what you want. You don't want to be dealing with gigantic weeds. So these are all the options. Finger weeders are actually the one, if I were going to think about corn weed control, like if I wanted to go out of the garden and I were thinking about corn, this is where I'd be looking, is with these fingers. So what these do is they actually, they have a flexible, the yellow part there is flexible and then the red part is metal. So you can set them at different angles. You have to be careful that you buy the right ones, because not all of them are flexible. But if you buy some that are flexible, they can actually push the soil up. And corn likes to have soil pushed up against it. It'll actually make, I mean, you know this better than I do. The extra roots that come out of the corn, when you hill soil, they're perfectly happy to grow into that. So by doing that, you can not only control weeds right up to the plant, but you're also helping to keep the plant from falling over during storms early in its life. So this is a very, very cool tool. And these can go on the Tillmore. These can actually be set up to go on tractors, and they can be set up to go on like a wheel hoe, a push hoe. So those are the kind of the weed control things. Although honestly, like wheel hose and normal hose, I own like 4 different kinds of hose, because, you know, it makes sense to go out and do a lot of things by hand. And when you're at a certain scale, that's how you know what's going on. So don't feel like you have to expand past that. Not necessary. Did that make sense? Did that kind of answer your question, Viola? Did you leave?
Yes. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Because right now we do that. That's what we do. Like everything we do is by hand, and so we're just trying to become more efficient. Like I said, we have the cover crop down. We've started putting in some seedlings in our nursery, started getting that going. This will be our first year in this particular area, but historically, it was a farm area. One, I guess about 1960 something or so. It had been an area that was, used for various crops, potatoes, cauliflower, and the soil is actually pretty, it's pretty good. Um, so there's a lot of, when we started getting our actual hands and feet in there, we were looking at the space saying, we've got to learn to become more efficient. This is more than
I think I got most of that.
Viola, your connection is kind of coming in and out, so we're catching bits and pieces of what you're saying.
Yes. But I think the gist of it was that you actually have a decent site with some good soils, but that you're looking to become efficient.
I'm sorry, is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking maybe it was my mic. You can hear me now? I was adjusting my microphone.
Oh, great.
So yeah, I was just saying that we have I was just saying that we have in our community garden, we do everything by hand. And we even teach the kids to do everything by hand. And with the acre, it's just, we got out there and we have a lot of invasives, a lot of non-natives that are growing in the area, but we do have the historic use of the area, and it once was a farm. And we know what crops were grown there. And so now we have a cover crop in just to try to, mitigate some of the weeds. Like we've gone through, we cleared it. We got a lot of roots out. We did a lot of just raking through it and hand pulling out the weeds or plants that we didn't want there, actually, because there are some native plants that grow there. And I think that's like part of our focus is to, try to maintain native plants because they're used for, medicinal and food resource, as well as the vegetation that we're trying to grow there, the vegetables that we're trying to grow. So yes, I think that something like that finger weeding, especially for the corn. And then I just missed it. I just have to look back at my notes, but somebody was mentioning what to use something like that for the like the squash plants as well. So just thinking like this is like really something simple that we could definitely use. I was saying that, we have like that acre plot, there's only 6 of us to hand do things. So we are looking to become, more efficient and learning what to use as far as the equipment. Also, as this becomes successful for us, we have about 4 more acres or so of land that's been set aside for us. So we just decided to start with an acre and then move forward from there. So we're also thinking like futuristically, like what would be more cost effective for us on a larger scale.
Yeah. Well, the general rule of thumb with walk behinds is that you can comfortably do 2 to 3 acres, and people stretch it to 5. And beyond that, most people end up upgrading to a larger piece of equipment because it is time consuming to do with walk behind tractors. As you get bigger, one of the nice things about using a tractor is that you can cover more ground with one pass, right? Whereas these walk behinds, it's like, one pass per couple of rows. So if you imagine an acre with all those rows, it takes a long time. But if you're thinking about increasing your size slowly, then a walk behind probably makes a lot of sense. And if you want to keep community members involved, walk behinds are definitely easier to learn to use. And, we talked about this idea of being gentle to the soil. That doesn't change no matter how big you get. If it rains, you can't go out with a tractor until the soil is at the right moisture. Otherwise, you're going to do a lot of damage. But with these walk behinds, you can get out a couple of days sooner usually. So you have more windows to do things in than you would with a tractor. So even on a larger scale, having one can allow you to get things done, which is really helpful. Yeah.
With our smaller tractor, we've
Yeah,
been,
what-
go ahead.
Well, no, I'm curious which tractor you have. You have
We have a John Deere 1026,
Oh, yeah.
which they call a rich man's lawnmower.
Yeah.
But it is very useful. I didn't want to give the impression it's not. With the bucket on there, it really helps with a lot of the lifting and the moving of soil and carrying hay and moving wood and all those different things, carrying buckets and all that kind of stuff. What I've been trying to do is, and they're available out there, is such as our manure spreader. Manure spreader we have is just a small one, 5x8, and it's belt or wheel driven as opposed to PTO driven. So you can put it behind the tractor, or you could put it behind a car or a truck, or if you have a heavy duty riding lawnmower, it's really versatile that way. The other thing is a brush cutter. A brush cutter, we finally 2 years ago got a nice big one because we're trying to keep things cut down in the fields, preventing especially invasives to seed out and then replant themselves. So if you catch the seed before it matures, that's great. And the more you plant or mow the brush, the better, but that also runs by itself. You don't have to hook it up to a PTO. And that's what we're looking at, is the equipment that, and you could put it behind our riding lawnmower or a work truck or whatever. So, looking at things that work. And the other thing that's nice about like the smaller spreader, which also does compost and manure, and we've put lime in there. We put all kinds of stuff in there. It's small enough to get in and out of your gardens. Usually our gardens are, 40 by 40, and it can get in and out real nice. Scaling it down to like a riding lawnmower, or if somebody has a ATV or whatever, they can hook it on the back of that, and you can do all that. Because when we first started putting out the manure, horse manure, it's like shovel and raking, and this does it really nice. So we're looking at equipment that, if you don't have a tractor, you can use an ATV or a small vehicle or a lawnmower to be able to use some of this equipment. And it's surprising, it's not that hugely expensive. And as we expand out, we have to have equipment to do that. We'll work with the tractor we have until it gives up the ghost and they feel sorry for us at the college and get us a newer one, because there are a lot of limitations. But if you can get a hold of a small tractor, if they were taken care of, as you see on Craigslist or any of those kind of things, they're selling tractors from the 30s and 40s and 50s, for $3, $4, $5,000, and the people then took good care of them, and they could be used even today. So I love our tractor. You know, we do a lot by hand. Don't get me wrong. Oh my gosh, you know, most of the time is bending over or using a stick or some of the other hand tools. Like you, Christo, we go through a lot of hose and rakes and shovels and everything. But sometimes you need that little bit of power or also the ease, you know, to sit and do all that. Especially at my age, it's really nice to sit there and do the tilling and stuff. Shallow tilling, of course, but get a lot more done. You know, as we're opening up 3 more acres in the last couple of years and building the soil, we could not do that if we didn't have the proper equipment to do that. But I would like to see at some time the tribes looking at maybe a equipment share that, you know, they're available within certain regions. So if Bad River or Red Cliff or the whole chunk, wherever that are within, you know, an hour or 2 drive, we can share equipment because it's all expensive, but it'd be nice to have it available, you know, that we can go and use the walk behind tractor for a day or 2 and then have it available for somebody else to do. Because it's all about money. That's why, you know, for a lot of this equipment. And yeah, I love it when we have youth coming all the time. And we're going to plant, you know, work in the gardens, we're going to show them how to use equipment. And they see the tractor and their eyes are like, and then we give them a stick or a antler rake or whatever. And they're like, oh. But then they're surprised how fast they can plant, you know, a whole big garden of beans, corns, and squash, or with just simple tools, you know. And that's the important thing, is encouraging people and empowering people that they can grow without a lot of equipment. You know, people have done that since the beginning of time, or before time, you know, that they were a lot of fuel and fancy machines. So I like machines, but I also can do all those things without, and we're successfully doing without the big power equipment. It's convenience, but also like breaking up the land that is not, it's been horrible land. You know, the school got it 35 years ago when we incorporated as a college. And before that, it was a farm and poor agricultural practices. And before that, it was woods. Before that, it was ice glaciers. And so it's got a lot of compaction, and it's just crappy. And, you know, it's just a building up, and it'll take more than 3 years to turn it around, but we're doing it piece by piece. So our plan is to start at a center like we're doing and work our way out that way. And as we do, now we're up to about 10 acres of growing. So equipment is good for convenience, but hey, yeah, we can all do it. But again, there's equipment out there. Another great source, especially if you're working with elders or need it simple, is Agribilities, spelled like agriculture and abilities. Agribilities, their catalog has all kinds of things to have available to encourage older people or people that maybe are veterans or had a stroke, or even they're just getting, like me, getting older, and it'd be nice to have a piece of equipment that isn't so hard to work with. And including, they have a thing, I saw it at a conference, where they could put a sheep into this thing and then just turn it over, and they can do all the shearing without ever lifting that sheep. And, you know, a person that worked at the farm with me a while back when we first discovered of Agribilities is like, this is so cool because it makes life easier, you know, because when you're out there 8-10 hours a day, it's nice to have some convenient, some easy to use equipment out there. But if we had like a tool share, if we have these certain types of equipment. Or it doesn't even have to be centralized. We can make sure people in our region are able to get it, but have a few out there because, hey, we all are planting about the same time. We're all harvesting about the same time. But it would really take the burden off people just starting or just have, are not as well off as like the University of Wisconsin to be able to buy all the latest equipment and stuff. So anyways, I'm going to have to go. I have to do a program. So thank you. This was really entertaining and interesting. Nice meeting you all.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, I do love the equipment sharing idea. It's always hard with distances for that reason of everyone doing everything at the same time. But when it works, it's really good. Yeah, our local farms share things like manure spreaders pretty readily. Tractors are harder, especially because then if it breaks, it's like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're not really close, it can take a long time to move a tractor. We have only a couple of tractors, and we have 3 different sites on the reservation that we grow in Oneida. And it could take you a better part of the day to move a tractor from one side to the other. So, yeah. Another good source that I just want to throw out there is county soil and water conservation districts sometimes have equipment that could be utilized. We're partnering with Outagamie County to do a cover crop project, and they have a no-till drill. So they're going to be coming out and helping us put that cover crop in. And they've been helping a lot of farmers in the area. So that's another good resource to reach out to. We're coming up on over 90 minutes of conversation on this topic. Maybe we should take some final thoughts and questions from everybody, and then we can wrap it up. All right, I'm going to take your silence as you have learned all that you need to know right now. And I'll send out a follow-up email that kind of has the highlights of the links and the equipment that was shared, and then a link to the recording. And you can always reach out to me, and I'm sure you can reach out to Crystal or other extension agents in your area for some more specific advice on small equipment. And Dan Cornelius too with the Intertribal Agriculture Council. So, Crystal, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I just do welcome anyone to reach out if you didn't feel like you wanted to share the details of your situation. I feel like sometimes growers feel like, oh, well, what I want isn't applicable to the group. Feel free to reach out and we can talk through really specifics. If that's helpful, I'm happy to do it.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, Crystal, and for walking us through what you do on your farm and the different equipment options. And I really appreciate you taking the time. And thank you, everybody else, for making time for this call. It was really nice to hear your voices and hear about what you're doing. And I'm excited for COVID to be over so we can do farm visits and hang out again. So until then, we're going to be doing another webinar on cover crops and corn. And that is coming up next week. That's going to be on Wednesday at 1 Central, 2 Eastern. So if you want to join us for that one, if you can't join us, we'll be recording that one too. So don't stress out too much about that. But this might be something too that's an ongoing conversation about Indigenous crops and kind of at the scale that a lot of people are at, which is just a few acres, how you make sure that you have everything you need resources wise to be really successful. So. All right, with that, I think I'm going to close it out. Thank you again, everybody, so much. Have a great rest of your week. Yep, Crystal just dropped her email in the chat box.
That'd be helpful.
Yeah, I'll add that into the email I send out too. All righty, thanks everyone.